Hello everyone, Tom French here talking about the Occupational Safety Act, or the Green Book, as we know it better by. Last week we talked about the table of contents for the Act. And the Act, I refer to it as the umbrella law. The general terms for safety in the workplace. Now the regulations, we're going to talk about them this week. They are more specific to the industry you're in. Now after the last video, Chris sent in a question wanting to know, very small business, want to know if they had to follow the Act or the regulations of the Green Book. We'll talk about that at the end of this video. First of all, in the table of contents for the regulations, it's industrial establishments, Regulation 851. You might be surprised who actually falls into industrial establishments, Regulation 851. Then we have construction projects, Regulation 213, which usually referred to as construction 213. Workplace hazardous material information system, you may know it better as WHMIS. Everybody has to be trained on WHMIS. That's Regulation 860. First aid requirements. Every company has to be familiar with this one, no matter how small you are. If you have under 5 people, it specifies how many Band-Aids you have to have in your facility, along with the rest of the first aid kit. And if you have more than 15, what you have to have in the facility as far as first aid kits. Control of exposure of biological chemical agents, Regulation 833. This tells us how much of a product we can be exposed to in a work day or a work week legally. Confined space. This is very specific and dangerous type work. Only certain companies deal with confined spaces, and you may have confined spaces in your workplace and be unaware of it. It has a definition, of course, of confined spaces and what they are. Healthcare and residential facilities, Regulation 67. Of course, this is for the healthcare sector. One particular thing interesting in this one, a lot of the other regulations, it says under certain circumstances you have to inform the Minister of Labor as soon as possible. On this one, in some situations, you have to report to the Minister of Labor forthwith. So that means immediately. And then we get into other regulations. Needle safety, Regulation 474. X-ray safety, Regulation 861. Diving operations, Regulation 629. It tells you how many people you have to have and their duties while on the diving operation. Farming operations, Regulation 414. Firefighting protection equipment, Regulation 714. Then we have the Occupational Safety Awareness Training, Regulation 297. This is something that came out in 2013. Every worker in Ontario needs to be trained on the health and safety awareness training. 4 steps of awareness for workers and 5 steps of awareness for supervisors. And this is, like I said, for everybody in Ontario. It can be done online, or you can get a third party to come in. Then we get into oil and gas offshore, Regulation 855, window cleaning, Regulation 859, rollover protection. That one sort of explains itself, what we have to have for protection for rollover equipment. Regulation 856. Designated substance, Regulation 490. This is what I refer to as the 11 nasties. 11 chemicals really bad, do long-term health effects to the body, such as asbestos, silica, coke emissions, acetones, those kinds of products. And they are listed in there. Designated substance and asbestos on construction projects. Of course, how to work with asbestos as far as remediation and working around asbestos. Critical injury, Regulation 834. Defines what a critical injury is, and of course, touched on briefly in the first video that if we have a critical injury, the Minister of Labor has to be informed immediately. Joint Health and Safety Committee and the exemptions from the regulations. If you have under a number of people, such as 19, you don't have to have a committee, you just have to have a safety representative. If you have more than 20, you have to have a committee. Now, there are specific setups for a committee. Also, if a project is under a certain length of time, you don't have to have a committee. So there are some ins and outs of whether you need one or not. Then we get into an inventory of agents and combination of agents. Of course, inventory of bad products. University Academy of Teaching Assistants, Regulation 858. And then Office of the Workers and Employers Advisory, which is Regulation 33. Now, I mentioned about Chris having a question, a small company. I think a lot of you could probably answer that question now yourselves. Every company, if you have an employee, you need to be familiar with the Green Book, because there's first aid, awareness, training awareness. Those are just the minimums that you have to know about before or while you have a company. Now, if you have any questions, send them to safetyboy31@gmail.com. If you like this video, hit like, tell your friends, and we'll see you next time. And of course, always be safe out there.